Guests at the dinner included Olympic Organising Committee Director Kevin Gosper and Chancellor-elect of the University of Newcastle, Shell Australia's CEO Rick Charlton. Organised by the Hunter Region Association of Councils, the event attracted local government and business representatives from across the region. According to Mr Gosper, the Hunter needs a united front for any Olympic benefits.
There'll be a great build-up of people coming into the city to plan for sport, to plan for facilities, to build up for conventions and so on, and you should hook into that linkage. No one should come into Sydney and not come up to the Hunter Valley.
Also launched last night, the Japan Festival, with the help of Japanese Consul General Mr Masaki Noguchi. Scheduled for next year, it's hoped the sporting and cultural event will further strengthen ties with both countries.
We're very important to Japan and Japan's very important to us. So I imagine a Festival of Japan at this time, leading on to the year 2000, is absolutely right.
Newcastle University also plans to benefit from Japanese and sporting connections. It's just announced details of a $9 million sports centre featuring an Olympic standard pool. The Hunter Regional Association of Councils met in Newcastle today to work through its recently released discussion paper. A public meeting will be called late May, a final strategy prepared by July.
I fought in the frozen mud of the Somme, in a blazing destroyer exploding in the North Sea. I fought on the perimeter of Tobruk, crashed in a flaming wreckage of a fighter in New Guinea. I lived with the damned in a place cursed with the name Changi.
A world away from war and generations removed from the young Australians who first served their country, school students nonetheless are aware of the sacrifices made and the costs of war. Is it important to come to Anzac services?
Yeah, because it's telling a bit about our history and that.
I was your mate, the kid across the street, the med school at graduation, the mechanic in the corner garage, the baker who brought your bread, the clerk who sent your phone bill.
I like people's medals and different things and learn about their medals and how old they were when they started.
1,700 students from 54 schools were transported by 30 buses to Civic Park for a school's remembrance service.
I just think it's pretty important, to honour all the people that was in the war.
It's very important to remember them about what they've done for us and all the war and all the trouble they went to for us.
We get a lot of stories about the war and the tradition just lives on a day like this today.
Anzac services will be held throughout the region on Monday. In Newcastle, the complement of the patrol boat HMAS Fremantle, which arrived in port today, will take part in a march through the city at 9:30.
There were two services held in the city during the morning, the first at East Maitland and the larger at Maitland Park. After a brief march, ex-service men and women gathered at the cenotaph. In the short but traditional service which followed, war heroes of the Lower Hunter were remembered. Wreaths were laid by school and youth groups, the RSL and women's organisations. Among those paying their respects was the Polish consul to Australia, Peter Longchamps de Beria. Major Laurie Young of the Salvation Army, in a poignant address, thanked the young people who took the time to remember the fallen.
It is not a sign of weakness that we and our children should think long and hard this Anzac Day. As was said by a New Zealand soldier after Gallipoli, I did not weep physically over the graves of my comrades. I wept in my heart.
While it may be a day set aside by Australia and New Zealand to remember those who paid the supreme sacrifice, Anzac Day had a special significance for one Singleton grandmother. Maria Hashik is one of only a few women to receive the Polish equivalent of the Victoria Cross. She worked for the Polish underground during World War II, passing on information gleaned from the Gestapo.
I am proud because not many people can just cherish that the reward, for their work.
Richard O'Leary has Anzac Day in Singleton. The body was found floating in a dam at the former Stockrington No. 2 colliery near West Wall's End. Police sealed off the area while a ground search was conducted and the site photographed from the air. According to police, the body was found just before midday by 3 bushwalkers. There are a number of tracks leading into the dam, but the area is accessible only by 4-wheel drive or on foot. The woman has not yet been identified. She was wearing pink-coloured slacks and had a shirt wrapped around her neck. She has reddy brown-coloured hair and is possibly aged in her mid-30s. She also has numerous distinctive tattoos.
She is extensively tattooed, quite noticeable tattoos on her back, one on the right thigh and one above the left knee, apart from tattoos at breast level.
A post-mortem will be carried out to determine the cause of death. Police say the body may have been in the dam for around 3 days.
Now, there appears to be a head injury, but until such time as the full post-mortem is conducted and the body's fully examined by the GMO, I'm unable to say at this stage what other injuries the female person has sustained.
Police divers are expected to search the dam tomorrow morning. Jodie McKay, NBN News.
The 4th member of the Yubagang family made an impatient entrance to the world about 50 kilometres short of Inverell Hospital.
Came very suddenly, I think. I thought we'd be cutting it pretty closely.
Elizabeth was right. Ambulance officers David Scott and Lindsay Forrester arrived at the roadside birthing ward near Cherry Tree Hill about half an hour after the event.
At 5 o'clock this morning, roughly, we were called to a woman in labour. When we arrived at 40 k's north of Inverell, we found a baby had already been delivered by their grandmother.
The grandmother done a fantastic job, being an ex-midwife in during the delivery and the care for the baby after the delivery, tying the cord off and keeping the baby warm, etc. So I think she deserves all the congratulations more than what we did. We just did the transport.
According to Dad Alan, it was a real family affair.
My mother was there and I helped out and so did Guy.
And the new arrival's name?
She came so quickly, we're still thinking.
Land hugging the coast at Stockton Bight around Fern Bay has long been considered by council planners as a natural corridor for population expansion. But a proposal to open it up to about 5,000 home sites and 20,000 people has landed the council, developers and those who want to see it left alone with a long-running battle.
This is a particularly difficult one. It's the biggest proposal the Shire's had, and undoubtedly we're going to have some problems with it.
A rezoning application on the land split the council but was eventually passed by a narrow margin. The Independent Commission Against Corruption, the Ombudsman and the Department of Local Government were targeted with complaints over the decision.
It's important that the public think that the right thing has been done, so I don't think an investigation's a bad thing.
The Department of Planning is yet to approve the council's recommendation and as yet no development application has been lodged with council.
The management side of it have followed very carefully the procedures, and we've taken legal advice on the way through to be sure that we're not doing something that's technically wrong. The political side of the debate, of course, is another thing. We don't control that. That's up to the elected politicians.
It seems as if the matter's now in a state of... As the owner of the Lake Macquarie showboat, Wanji Queen, Graham Burgess knows what can be a placid pace of life on the lake, but it was a change of pace he was after on a recent holiday. Graham was among 80 skydivers who bailed out of a Soviet cargo jet to parachute onto the North Pole.
I was the first Australian in history to parachute onto the North Pole, and being the second Australian in history to actually go to the North Pole. Of course, Dick Smith went there in 1987.
Graham has wanted to visit the pole since he was a boy, and with his interest in skydiving was the first booked onto the plane carrying an international crew of jumpers.
Nobody was prepared for the scene below, which was the moonscape of the North Pole. It was a shattering experience to see outside that aircraft and knowing that we had to jump out of it as well, and that was really scary.
Graham made the drop and planted the Lake Macquarie flag on the North Pole. He says he'd do it all again, but next time over the South Pole.
Peter Tilley has been waiting 4 years for justice. In February 1990, he says he was wrongly arrested and charged with a robbery and assault he didn't commit.
It was just totally devastating. It was unbelievable that something like this could happen.
Mr. Tilley had to report to the police at least 3 times a week until eventually, through lack of evidence, the matter was not proceeded with. It was no billed.
They've actually persecuted me. They wanted to, carry so far into the drama of it all. And then in the end they say, well, sort of go home, mate, it's all over.
Peter Tilley wants justice. He's going to stage a protest in front of Attorney General Hannaford's office tomorrow.
They've been doing it in Japan for years. Now staff and management at Curry's aluminium smelter are warming up and staying healthy. In a pilot program launched yesterday, around 30 men and women were shown the right and wrong ways to approach their daily work. Leading the charge was Sarge. Before every game, he and his fellow knights go through a series of warm-up exercises. According to the team captain, the work situation is no different.
I've had some of your duties explained to me, and you guys have to do some pretty hard yakkery out there, and in that regard you're not dissimilar to football players.
For most of these men, muscle strain, particularly in the back, neck and shoulders, is a normal hazard of work. But rehab staff at the smelter believe the incidence of injury can be reduced with a few simple warm-up exercises. The Curry smelter is the first to embark on the innovative program. It's hoped that staff at administrative and management levels will also take part, helping to lower the number of days lost due to work injuries.
All the pomp and ceremony of a traditional graduation was on display at Newcastle University's Great Hall. Hundreds of students from the Faculty of Economics and Commerce were the first to graduate from the class of '93 with their ceremony this morning. Another was held this afternoon, with the other 6 being on tomorrow and next Friday and Saturday. The record number of graduates is an encouraging sign for Newcastle University as its reputation increases together with student numbers.
The number of graduates are increasing because our pipeline number of students is still growing. It's to say students who are in the system and not yet graduated, that's producing more of an outflow, so to speak.
Many of the graduates have already managed to snare jobs since they finished at uni late last year, and as the country climbs out of recession, the prospects look good.
Chances of getting jobs are getting better, much better than they were a year ago. We've tracked them fairly well in certain disciplines. In engineering, for example, we know that 3/4 of the graduates have a job within the first year.
Today's workshop, involving residents, community groups and businesses, was the first step in determining the future direction of Newcastle's West End. Professor John Newman and Jeremy Dawkins from the University of Technology in Sydney will coordinate the study, which will take in Hunter Street West, the harbour foreshore and the southeast area of Wickham. Both experts were responsible for revamping Fremantle in Western Australia.
We see a major transformation taking place on both sides of the railway line. And the aim of our study is to involve the community in that to make it as positive as possible.
Mr Dawkins believes the West End has a lot of potential, and while it's important to encourage people to the area, he says they must exist in harmony with the many light industries and businesses which are already established.
What we're after is a lively place where people are working, where they're shopping and doing other forms of business, and where people are living as well. And you've got a local population, and you've got a lot of other people that go there too, to work or to do business.
While the $25,000 study has been commissioned by Newcastle Council, it's being funded under the state and federal government's Better Cities program. It should take 2 months to complete and will set the scene for the revitalisation of Newcastle's West End. Jodie McKay, NBN News.
In the archaeological dig,
Russian-born Zhu has become an adopted Australian, especially by the people of Newcastle, where he has fought most of his professional fights. The unassuming 24-year-old has already won the right to challenge IBF super lightweight world champion Jake Rodriguez. He could wait until September for that fight, but to keep in touch, he is putting that right on the line against Hernandez.
We've laid our cards fairly and squarely on the table. A defeat would be horrendous for us, so it's a very, very important fight.
Zoo is the #1 contender for the super lightweight title after winning all of his 11 professional encounters. Puerto Rican Angel Hernandez is a veteran of the sport with an impressive record of 1 loss in 49 fights. That 1 loss was the only crack he ever got at a world title, and the 33-year-old is champing at the bit for a second chance. His trainer was in a confident frame of mind today.
The fans from Australia allow us to be part of their country. We must stay for long. They don't boo us, so we will knock him out easy, so we go home.
Kostya Zoo, on the other hand, has different plans.
I never think about losers. I'm confident to win.
In announcing the 3-year contract, Knights boss Brad Mellon said he believed Muir will play for Australia. So this is a prize signature. Muir, a Newcastle junior, has played brilliantly this season, and the free-running forward wants to stay with the Knights for a premiership.
I believe that in the next 3 years that we will win the Winfield Cup.
And you want to be in the team?
I definitely do. I wouldn't be staying here if I didn't.
Muir knocked back a $100,000 plus per season contract with Perth, so this Knights deal must be fairly lucrative.
Well, I understand you want to buy a house with the money, mate.
Yeah, I do. I'll be looking in the next couple of months now for a house in town somewhere.
Houses aren't cheap.
No, they're not cheap. You can also get loans from the bank too, don't forget.
The Knights take on the Bears this weekend at North Sydney Oval. It will be a clash of 2 giant packs. The Knights underdogs, but an upset is on the cards if their form from the last 2 weeks keeps rolling. Meanwhile, Chief Paul Harrigan features in the latest promotion for the City Country clash. That game is on next Friday night at Marathon Stadium. Right from the start, the Falcons meant action, Dozier potting a basket. Derek Rucker and Michael Johnson just couldn't miss. Everyone was talking about the clash between Rucker and former Falcon Everett Stevens, and while Stevens was scoring points, it was Rucker's night. Everything he touched turned to gold. The Harlem Globetrotters would have been impressed. At the halfway mark, the Falcons led the Cats 70-45. More of the same in the last 2 quarters, the Falcons piling on the pressure. For the game, Dozier, Jensen and Johnson all snared 20 points, Rucker 24. For the Cats, Branch and Stevens topped the card. The final score, Newcastle 130, Geelong 106. It was the first win for the Falcons in 4 starts. Peter Ryan, NBN News.
For 101 years, workers have marched through the streets of Newcastle to celebrate their rights and fight against injustice. Their latest campaign is to save the ANL, the Australian National Line, which is the country's major shipping company. It's threatened with privatisation, which could result in lost jobs.
We want to keep these jobs here in Australia and keep Australian companies working.
It was a more subdued gathering at the Christchurch Cathedral in Newcastle this morning for the commemoration of the Coral Sea naval battle that turned the tide of the Second World War in favour of the Allies. The service was followed by a public gathering at Civic Park, attended by representatives from Australian and American forces. It's 52 years since the Japanese fleet was stopped as it tried to push further south towards Australia.
The first time that the Japanese Navy had been blunted, and the operational objective of preventing the invasion of Port Moresby was achieved.
Richard O'Leary, NBN News.
Medium security prison warders will walk off the job from 10:30 tonight. Police will also assume control there during the 24-hour protest. Camera crews recording tourism today has not returned to normal. About 50 of them.
The Rosellas trailed early, but Ashley Gordon was Johnny on the spot to equal the scores. The next try was Gordon at his best, leaving defenders grasping at air. It was teamwork that provided try number 3 for Wes, the ball going through 6 pairs of hands before a touchdown under the posts. Maitland tried everything to peg back the lead, perseverance eventually paying off after a mid-air fight for the ball. But that was the end of the Maitland charge, the Rosellas going on to win by 28 points to 14. In other games, Nelson Bay chalked up a cricket score against Central, Toronto beat Lakes and Curry downed Waratah. The loss of second rower Tony Butterfield earlier in the week on a kneeing charge makes Johns' inclusion that more important. His good kicking and passing game will be vital for the team in its attempt to bounce back from the last-minute loss to Balmain. A return to Marathon Stadium is also a morale boost after 2 intense away games. Coach David Waite says his team won't take the game lightly, even though Parramatta is favourite to finish Wooden Spooners in 1994.
I think Paul Dunn is certainly one of those. Ivor Rapati, Scott Marn back in first grade again, all talented players. Young Michael Butner, so they've got some good players. We just have to do what we do well, and we'll come away with the points.
Big games are expected from the Knights pushing for a place in the State of Origin squad to be named on Sunday night. Paul Harrigan looks assured of a place. Robbie McCormack is being tipped by many pundits, whereas Mark Sargent and Mark Glanville will have to produce something special to force their way into the Blue squad. Richard O'Leary, NBN News. The alarm went out after the Windale post office was held up by 4 people, one believed to be a woman. A shotgun was used in the hold-up, which occurred just after 4 p.m. Their getaway car was found at the top of Madison Drive, Charlestown, near its intersection with the Pacific Highway. Police captured 3 people, but one man believed to be armed escaped into bushland. Madison Drive was closed off to traffic as police set up a command post. The police dog squad was called in to search bushland off Princeton Drive, Adamstown Heights, below the Apollo Motel. Around half an hour ago, police apprehended the man behind the Apollo Motel. He's now being questioned. It's thought one of those arrested may be an escapee. Richard O'Leary, NBN News.
Some of the cast of Starstruck took centre stage in the children's ward of the John Hunter Hospital. The show won't officially open for a fortnight. Even so, these children were given a sneak preview. For 11-year-old Karen Oswald, who spent months in hospital, these interlopers provided a welcome distraction.
Yeah, it's probably the curious thing I've had today.
2,500 students will take part in the 3-day Starstruck school concert.
These are just some of the implements police have seized over the years during their investigations, from bongs to bags of cocaine and even this Coke can which was modified to hide drugs. While police are making inroads into the illegal drug trade, they depend on information from the public on users and suppliers. Every year they hold Operation Noah. Last year, more than 40,000 calls were received Australia-wide. In northern New South Wales, that breaks down to 158 on the mid-north coast, 74 calls in the Tamworth Police District, 150 in the Lower Hunter, 98 in the Upper Hunter, 81 in the Northern Rivers Zone, and 122 on the Central Coast. 68% of those calls were related to the supply of amphetamines. Once again, police are targeting backyard laboratories.
We're asking people such as real estate agents, next door neighbours, etc., to keep a lookout. Is there a strong smell of chemicals coming from the premises? Different people coming and going at odd times of the day and night.
Police want to hear from anyone with information, no matter how small it may seem. The number to call tomorrow is 008 011 233. All information will be collated in Sydney and then sent out to the districts concerned. Jodie McKay, NBN News.
Professor Clark was the guest speaker at the Newcastle Business Club's annual grill of the federal budget. He was a bearer of good news, predicting the budget will boost developments like the Honeysuckle project and the development of Kooragang Island.
By and large, I think there's a great opportunity for Newcastle.
He says there's only one drawback to the budget: no tax cuts.
One of the negatives might be that there haven't been tax decreases, but that's general, not specifically for this region.
But the budget's predicted increase in investment of 14.5% is seen as a realistic target for Newcastle, especially if small business starts to expand.
Well, I think they certainly have to have confidence and have a go.
Professor Clark says if small business is to have a go and help create jobs, the government must provide long-term plans for economic growth in preference to the yearly budget.